She held up the black sword, high, high, towards the sky.
そして私は剣を投げ捨てる。ずっとずっと遠くへ。やめろと叫ぶ意識を振り払う。たとえ痛みが腕を奪うのだとしても、こんなものを友達へ向けることなんてできない。だからそんなところで笑うのはやめて、M。言ったわ。私、あなたを守るって。
She held Charlie's body tightly, tightly. The sword she threw away was swallowed up by far-off black space, disappearing completely without a single trace. She touched her cheek to her precious friend's hair. She could feel her friend's warmth through her arms even as they hurt.
伝わるものがある。もうあなたの体に染みついて離れないもの。怯えと怖さとが入り混じったもの。ひどい震え、凍えているみたいに体は震えて。シャーリー、ごめんね。ずっと気づかずにいて。あなたがこんなに震えていたこと、一緒にいたのに。ごめんね。ありなに、どうして剣して。
She knew the meaning of her shaking voice because her body had always been shaking.
必要ないわ。私たちがあんな風に剣を振るう必要なんてない。だって私たち友達だもの。一緒にいるわ。でもこんなところはダメ。ここには誰もいない。ここじゃ私たち何もできない。あなたとアーシェと私で明日へ行こう。お茶ずっとあなたと飲んでいないわ。食事もしたい。劇場にだって行こう。好きな本をたくさん読んでおしゃべりをしよう。好きな男の子の話だって聞きたいわね。シャーリー。メアリー、でも私はもう諦めてしまった。何もかも捨てると契約を。彼と。震える声でシャーリーが言う。大丈夫。怖がらないで。心配することなんて何もない。どうでもいいわ、そんなこと。あなたの願いは叶ってなんかいない。私があなたの剣に貫かれてもあなたの震えは止まらない。絶対に一人きりで震えないで。二人でもダメ。私たち一人じゃ何もできない。あなたたちがいるから私はここでこうしているの。シャーリー、アーシェ、ジェーンにモランもドナもそう、アンにもケインズもバイオラもエリーもザックもおじさんも母様も、みんながいたからずっと諦めないでいられただけ。もしも私が一人だったら何もできない。あなたが眠りについたあの夜にきっと怪物に追いつかれていたわ。
From Charlie's eye, tears. Tears fell. She couldn't see her face, but she could tell. Even if her right eye hadn't told her, she would have been able to tell.
うん、ごめんなさい。大丈夫よ、シャーリー。心配しないで。もう大丈夫だから。
Quietly, Charlie closed her eyes. As if falling asleep, she quietly let a single, final tear fall. Her two eyes closed, quietly, quietly. Her golden left eye changed to green without a sound. And then... why did it become golden in the first place? Sharnoth shook. Sharnoth grated, without a sound. There probably wasn't a single person who could see it, because there were none who could see through the black. They were unable to see the change. There probably wasn't a single person who could hear it, because the black sucked up all sounds. They were unable to hear the change. However, the black world definitely granted and changed. The four flames disappeared, the gates of Tartarus closed. No one noticed it. No one should have. However, just one man was different. He'd wished for this unlit world he rejected tomorrow while knowing everything. He'd wished for an end to everything before the day of despair. Only that man knew of the change.
バカなシャルノスが揺らぐそんなはずはないのに
His voice had blood in it. It was a cry of bitter pain. He scratched at his beautiful hair. The man shouted as anger warped his beautiful face.
4人の命を奪わせた王の選んだ2人に剣を握らせた
But they threw it away.
誤りは何もないはずだ僕らは永遠を手に入れたはずなのになぜだ王よ世界はここで止まるんだ間違った歴史など訪れてはならないのになぜあの女なんだなぜ僕じゃないなぜ僕に選ばせない
A scream shaking from despair. However, it didn't reach anyone in the lonely world. This was his own Sharnoth, so his voice only reached himself. No one could hear it.
Mary!
His scream reached no one.
見事なものだ
The words of the man on the throne were words of praise, along with a sense of ridicule. The girl the man gazed at disappeared, as if melting into the writhing black, gazing at the space where the other girl had been. However, the man's words reached her. The girl looked up in response to his voice. She tried to speak to him. However, the man spoke as if to cut her off. Quietly, yet solemnly.
全てを失ったこの世界で一人であることを選んだのは俺だこの俺だお前たちではないだが
The man looked at the girl's golden eye, an eye which saw through everything, an eye said to see things which shouldn't be visible. Could the girl see it, the fact that the man had an expression? A faint one, as if looking at something bright.
お前にはくれてやるメアリー・クラリッサ
A single voice rang out. What's he doing? At that moment, space twisted. There was a hand in front of her eyes, a dark, dark black hand. The man sitting in his black throne who had been looking down at her from far away, that man held out his black hand towards the girl, towards the girl's face, towards the girl's eye. The man's hand twisted all worlds at will. The man's hand rewrote all worlds as it saw fit. Distance, time, they meant nothing to him. But the girl didn't understand that, which is why she was at the mercy of that hand. It covered her vision, her eyes, her voice had no time to react, almost as if to block her eyes. The darkness shunned all light and covered her up.
お前にだけはくれてやるメアリー
A voice leaked out of her lips. Because you didn't give up. It's a fitting reward. Hmm? Why are we back here again? Don't tell me it was all just a dream. It can't be. She slowly opened her eyes. It was a bit bright. Was the engine light in her room on? The Thames, the residential district, the voices of small birds. Something felt slightly different. Her vision shook. There was a wet sensation in the corner of her eye. Had she had another dream? But it didn't feel strange. It wasn't that worrying. This was normal. Yes, it was normal. Nothing unusual at all. A normal day for Mary. I wonder if this is just an illusion that M created for her. Her bed was warm now because of her body heat. Somehow she managed to get herself out of it. Waking up, it didn't feel that bad today. She wasn't lacking sleep either. This would probably count as a refreshing morning. However, it was nothing worth thinking about much.
そう、いつものこと。
She washed her face in the bathroom. The soap made bubbles as she poured cold water over herself. Charlie and Angie said she looked better without makeup, but recently she'd become curious about it. She was sure they'd like it if she was prettier. Someday she'd learn how from Mrs. Hudson or her mother. She always thought that when she looked in the mirror, but she'd never tried it. She took off her pajamas, threw them into the washing engine, and changed into the usual outdoor clothes. She looked out the window while doing up her buttons. The same grey sky as usual, people leaving their homes for work or school. What the Holborn residential district usually looked like. She opened the window to check the mist. It wasn't that thick, neither was the smoke. The same as usual, when either was thick, her clothes or hair would get dirty, and it felt uncomfortable. But today was the same as usual.
見えないかな。私は視線を少し上へ向けて空を見る。
That in the sky. The gap in the sky. It shouldn't be visible. It's a little too far from here. She'd have to go out to Hyde Park and look up from the ruins. She could only see what she usually saw. She could see some sunlight pouring in through the grey sky, but no gaps. While looking at the sky while brushing her hair, she suddenly thought of Charlie. She who said she loved the gaps in the sky. She who was one of Mary's most precious friends. What was she doing today?
シャーリーは目覚めるようになった。起きていられる時間はまだ短いけど、それでも目覚めるようになった。
5 minutes a day, not very long, but the doctor said she'd be back to normal soon. Someday she'd wake up completely and they could talk again.
あ、そうだ。シャーリーが元気になったら母様に電報を打たないと。
She whispered and picked up an envelope on the side of her desk. A telegram from her mother. She'd read it just last night. Her mother would be coming home to visit soon and she wanted to stay in Mary's room, so she'd have to clean it at some point. That was what the telegram said. Mary smiled softly and put the envelope back onto her desk, on top of her seals and bank books. Books.
これでよし
Bank
と。
book.
漠然とした違和感があった。違う、何か。
あら、おはようメアリー。あら、まあ今日は早起きさんなのね。何かいいことでもあるのかしら？
そういうわけじゃないです。
That face.
いつもと同じです、ミセスハドソン。
おいおい、おはようはどうしたメアリー。すいませんね、どうもしつけがなってなくて。
いえいえ、私がおはようの邪魔をしてしまったからそれで言えなかったのよね、メアリー。
あ、おじさん？
As they walked out of the lodging house, she and Mrs. Hudson both looked surprised. Come to think of it, this wasn't surprising at all. Uncle George, he'd been visiting every morning recently.
ジョージおじさん、下宿暮らしの私を心配してくれる。でも、ここのところいつもというのは。まさかミセスハドソンに。そんなことないわよね。年だって離れてると。
Oh, come on, don't be so narrow-minded.
お前は小さい頃から挨拶はする子だから、そこんところは心配してなかったんだが、こりゃ再教育だな。
あら、それじゃあお手伝いしなくちゃ。
挨拶のことはすみません。でも、二人とも子供扱いしないでください。私もう大人なんですから。
She wasn't a child anymore, though she was embarrassed to have someone else see her like this. But this was also normal. It didn't feel too bad, just a little embarrassing. It was normal.
いつものこと。そう、いつものこと。